teaching this fantastic method is people continually say, I can't draw a straight line. I don't have the talent, Bob, to do what you're doing.
Bob Ross, the soft-spoken painter with the gentle smile and the happy little trees, has been gone for 3 decades, yet his art has suddenly become the talk of the auction world. Once dismissed as humble television decor, his landscapes are now fetching staggering sums, with one small 1987 painting selling for nearly $50,000. So what changed? How did a man who painted calm into chaos create a market frenzy decades after his death? Grab a seat as we uncover the fortune behind Bob Ross's forgotten masterpieces. Why a Bob Ross is worth more than you think. It isn't just nostalgia driving the explosion in Bob Ross's market value. There are clear, traceable reasons his originals have become almost mythical. For a man who spent over a decade teaching millions to paint, Ross actually created far fewer pieces than most fans assume. Over 31 seasons of the joy of painting, Bob Ross created around 1,143 works for the show. And today, Bob Ross Inc. safeguards roughly 1,165 of his original paintings in a private vault at its Northern Virginia headquarters. But what most people don't know is that he painted 3 versions of each scene. One before the show as a guide, another during filming, and a third afterward for close-up photography. That means about 3,400 individual canvases connected to his TV legacy, yet only a fraction have ever reached collectors. So, where are the rest? The vast majority never went to market. Ross and his team donated many to PBS stations for fundraising drives, but thousands more were retained by Bob Ross Inc., the company he co-founded.
I'd like to introduce you to my partner and longtime friend, Annette Kowalski. Annette, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob.
Decades later, those paintings remain in secure storage in Virginia, carefully preserved but off-limits to public sale. The company treats them as part of a historical archive rather than commodities, which has made the few that do emerge extraordinarily scarce. And scarcity is the bedrock of value. That's why collectors and fans react so intensely when a genuine Bob Ross canvas appears. On rare occasions, a painting surfaces through private owners, former station employees, or families who received one as a gift. In those moments, prices can fluctuate wildly. Estimates from Bob Ross Inc.'s own president once placed most authentic works between $8,000 and $10,000, a respectable but modest figure compared to the 6-figure sales seen today. Even smaller, unconventional Ross items, like the gold pans he hand-painted during his Alaska years, have fetched thousands at auction simply because of their rarity and personal touch. The unpredictability of the market adds to the mystique. With so few authenticated pieces available, there's no consistent pricing benchmark. Some buyers view them as art investments. Others see them as tangible pieces of childhood comfort. That emotional connection, coupled with their extreme scarcity, has transformed Ross's paintings into coveted cultural relics. 30 years after his death, what once looked like hobbyist landscapes now trade hands like museum treasures, gentle reminders that the calmest painter on television quietly left behind one of the rarest art legacies of his time. But here's the real mystery. If thousands of Bob Ross originals still sit unseen, in storage, what might happen the day even one of them is released to the public? Stay tuned to find out. The Towson surprise. What sold and for how much? When the gavel came down at the Towson auction house, no one expected a small 1987 landscape by Bob Ross to become the headline of the day. Yet that's exactly what happened. The painting, Lake with Cabin and Trees, sold for an astonishing $47,500, shattering its pre-sale estimate of $20,000 to $30,000. Bidding had opened at a modest $10,000. But the number quickly climbed as collectors and Ross enthusiasts battled for a piece of history. The buyer's identity was kept private, only adding to the air of mystery that has always surrounded Ross's elusive originals. This wasn't just any Ross painting. The piece carried a deeply personal touch, an inscription that read, "To Sid and Dorothy, Happy Painting Bob Ross. Those few words linked it to Sidney and Dorothy Knudsen, two early supporters who had received the work as a personal gift from Ross himself. From there, the painting passed to their daughter, Arlene Alacio, and later to her son, Sam Alacio, who eventually decided to consign it for auction. That direct, traceable lineage gave the artwork an authenticity that collectors dream about. In the art world, provenance, the documented chain of ownership, can be the difference between an ordinary sale and a record breaker. But the sale's impact reached far beyond one family's keepsake. It proved how dramatically Bob Ross's market had shifted. For decades, his works were undervalued, dismissed by traditional galleries as sentimental television art. But in recent years, the demand has spiked as fans and investors realize just how few authentic pieces are available. The Towson sale was a wake-up call, a vivid demonstration that the combination of verified provenance, Ross's signature, and pristine condition could propel prices into the stratosphere. Experts noted that the painting's composition, a serene lakeside scene framed by autumn trees and a reflective cabin, captured everything that made Ross beloved: tranquility, color harmony, and effortless calm. It represented the very heart of what millions of viewers tuned in for every week. That emotional connection translated into dollars, revealing that collectors weren't just buying paint on canvas, they were buying nostalgia, serenity, and the legacy of a man who taught them to see beauty in mistakes. For Bob Ross Incorporated, the Towson result was both validation and a market signal. It showed that even a single release from private hands could ignite excitement across the art world. And for fans, it reinforced what had already become clear: scarcity breeds desire. When a genuine Ross surfaces, it doesn't just sell. It reminds the world how valuable his gentle genius has truly become. But how could a man who brought peace to millions be quietly enduring such an unspoken storm of his own? Keep watching. What the last 12 months of Bob Ross's life really looked like. The record-breaking sale in Towson didn't just highlight the value of Bob Ross's art, it also stirred memories of the man behind the canvas, especially the quiet pain that marked his final year. As collectors marveled at his tranquil landscapes, few realized that in his last 12 months, Ross himself was living anything but serenity. Behind the calm voice and gentle smile that had soothed millions, he was fighting a battle he chose to keep almost entirely secret. By 1994, Ross's once flourishing energy had begun to fade. He had been diagnosed with lymphoma, a form of cancer that aggressively attacked his lymphatic system. Rather than announce it publicly, he made a decision that reflected his lifelong humility. He kept the diagnosis private. He didn't want sympathy or distraction. He wanted viewers to remember the joy of painting, not the frailty of the painter. So, even as his health deteriorated, he pressed on. His beloved show, The Joy of Painting, went into reruns that year, but many fans didn't notice the difference. The magic of his presence lingered on screen, masking the reality that he was growing weaker with each passing month. His personal life during that time was marked by loss and heartbreak.
We just work all the way across the canvas. Maybe in our world.
In 1993, just 2 years before his death, Ross lost his second wife, Jane, to cancer, a devastating blow that left him emotionally gutted. Those close to him said he became quieter, pressured, reflecting his yearning for companionship amid worsening illness. It was a short-lived chapter that preceded his final days in 1995. Even as his body weakened, Ross refused to let illness dictate his spirit. He continued to paint, give lessons, and make plans for his brand's future. But those plans were complicated by growing tensions with his business partners, Annette and Walt Kowalski. They had co-founded Bob Ross Incorporated years earlier, but as Ross's health failed, disagreements over ownership and licensing intensified. Some of his last business decisions, made under immense physical and emotional strain, would later define the decades-long battle over his name, image, and the control of his paintings. When Ross passed away on July 4, 1995, at the age of 52, he left behind not just a legacy of art and kindness, but a tangled web of legal and emotional conflicts. Many of his final paintings remained locked away, frozen in time, silent witnesses to the quiet storm he endured during his last year on Earth. But let's rewind the clock and uncover how this quiet painter became a cultural icon. From Air Force drill sergeant to TV comfort, Bob Ross's rise. The story of Bob Ross's final months may have ended in quiet tragedy, but his rise to fame was built on transformation, the remarkable journey from a tough Air Force sergeant to the soft-spoken icon who made millions believe in happy little trees. Before the calm, there was command. Ross enlisted in the United States Air Force at just 18 and spent 2 decades in service, eventually becoming a master sergeant stationed in Alaska. The icy wilderness would change his life forever. Amid long winters and sweeping landscapes, he found both solace and inspiration. The snow-capped mountains, tranquil lakes, and misty pines of Alaska.
Hooray! That's what we have to do. I have to put myself in that almighty bubble.
Became the essence of his future art. Yet, the young sergeant's job required him to be anything but gentle. He earned the nickname Bust-em-up Bobby for his strict discipline and sharp tone when managing subordinates. Years later, Ross would confess that he'd grown tired of yelling, that he wanted to create something that offered the peace he couldn't find in uniform. In his spare time, Ross began painting, not as a trained artist, but as a man searching for calm. Soon, he became an instructor in Alexander's painting company, touring and teaching workshops. Students loved his warmth and encouragement, traits that distinguished him from Alexander's brash on-screen manner. When Ross eventually launched The Joy of Painting in 1983, his quiet tone and nurturing spirit struck a chord that television had never seen before. Viewers who knew nothing about art found comfort in his voice. Each episode featured Ross completing a new landscape in just 26 minutes. And what audiences didn't realize was that he created 3 versions of every painting. One beforehand for planning, one during filming, and one afterwards for photography and instructional use. But the joy of painting was only part of the phenomenon. Ross and his business partners, Annette and Walt Kowalski, recognized the brand potential behind his persona. They developed Bob Ross Incorporated, selling paint sets, brushes, instructional videos, and even licensing workshops led by certified instructors. This model allowed fans not only to watch, but to paint with Bob Ross, a revolutionary idea at the time. Some of his originals were donated to PBS stations for fundraising drives, helping sustain the very networks that introduced him to America. By the late 1980s, Ross had become more than a TV painter. He was a cultural touchstone. His curly perm, denim shirts, and phrases like "happy little accidents" entered everyday language. What began as a quiet escape from military rigidity evolved into an empire of calm, optimism, and color. And while Ross never sought fame, his image, and the art that carried it, grew into one of the most beloved creative brands in modern history, setting the stage for both his lasting influence and the complex battles that would follow his death. But behind all that serenity and soft-spoken charm was something else quietly taking shape, a storm no one saw coming. Stay tuned. The legal rights that shaped the market. Bob Ross's meteoric rise from Air Force instructor to cultural icon wasn't just a story of paint and passion. It was also the beginning of a tangled web of ownership that would later define how the world experienced his legacy. As the joy of painting gained national attention, Ross, along with his close associates Annette and Walt Kowalski, founded Bob Ross Incorporated and Likeness. At first, it seemed like a partnership built on friendship and shared vision. Ross was the face, the Kowalskis handled the business side, and everyone benefited from the growing demand for painting supplies, TV syndication, and instructional materials. But the harmony didn't last. When Ross's second wife Jane passed away in 1993, her shares in the company transferred to the Kowalskis, leaving Bob as a minority shareholder in the very brand that bore his name. As his health declined, that imbalance of power became a critical issue. Bob wanted his estate, particularly his son Steve Ross, to control his image and artistic legacy after his death. However, The company's legal structure made that nearly impossible. Kowalski's, armed with controlling shares and signed documents granting them rights to use his name, likeness, and intellectual property, were positioned to own nearly everything tied to the Bob Ross brand. After Bob's death in 1995, what followed was a long and painful series of legal disputes. Steve Ross, who had occasionally appeared on The Joy of Painting, fought to regain some control over his father's legacy, arguing that his father's true wishes were for the family to inherit his artistic rights. But the legal paperwork told a different story. Courts sided with Bob Ross Incorporated, ruling that the rights were contractually assigned to the company, not to Ross's estate. Decades later, the company continued to grow, licensing Ross's image for everything from t-shirts to video games, while his family received little or no financial benefit. A key moment came in 2019 when Steve Ross and his business partner filed a lawsuit seeking to reclaim the rights. The court, however, reaffirmed that Bob Ross Incorporated held legal ownership over the name and likeness, effectively closing the door on any future claims. It was a painful confirmation that the artist's goodwill had been outmaneuvered by airtight contracts. These legal complexities have a direct impact on today's collectors. Because Bob Ross Incorporated owns most of his original works and restricts their sale, the market remains tightly controlled. Only a handful of paintings ever reach public auctions, and those that do, like the Towson sale, command staggering prices due to their scarcity and verifiable provenance. Collectors must navigate a world where owning a Bob Ross doesn't just mean holding a painting, it means understanding the legal maze that surrounds his name.
Right, let's wash the old brush. I think partially he used the work to keep his...
Ironically, the same business machine that locked his family out of profits has also protected his brand's consistency. Every licensed brushstroke, every image, and every word, all filtered through Bob Ross Incorporated, keeps his presence alive. Yet behind that careful curation lies the question that still haunts fans and collectors alike. Who truly owns Bob Ross, the corporation that preserves him, or the family and fans, who remember the man who simply wanted everyone to find joy in painting? The quiet brushstroke that refused to fade. Even after years of legal wrangling and questions of ownership, Bob Ross's story doesn't end in courtrooms or contracts. It lingers in every whisper of color that still finds its way across a screen. His final days were filled with pain and exhaustion, yet what survived him was a legacy too vast to contain. By the time illness took hold in the early 1990s, Ross had already become more than a TV personality. He was a companion to millions of quiet evenings, a man who turned art into solace. The same brush that once calmed his viewers had begun to fail him, but he refused to surrender. Behind the peaceful landscapes that defined the joy of painting, his health was steadily deteriorating. Years of heavy smoking had led to 2 heart attacks, and in 1994 came the cruelest blow, a diagnosis of lymphoma. Still, he hid his struggle from the public eye. While his body weakened, his spirit stayed fixed on the canvas, determined to leave beauty where pain had taken root. Those who watched the last season of his show could sense something different. The thinning curls, the softer voice, the slower strokes. Yet the warmth in his words never faded. Even when his hands trembled, his tone remained steady, reassuring, almost fatherly. When he could no longer stand at the easel, Ross retreated to his home in Orlando, Florida, where he faced the inevitability he had long sensed. He once confessed that he never expected to grow old, but he wanted his art to outlive him. In the quiet of those final months, he worked to secure his company's future. What began as an act of preservation turned into a chain of legal battles that would last decades after his passing. On July 4, 1995, at just 52, Bob Ross took his final breath surrounded by family and friends, a date fittingly symbolic for a man who taught America how to find freedom in a brushstroke. Yet death didn't dim his presence. His gentle voice soon found a new home online. When old episodes resurfaced on YouTube and streaming platforms in the 2010s, a generation that never knew him in life discovered his gift. They weren't just watching to paint, they were listening to heal. The steady rhythm of his palette knife became therapy, his calm encouragement a balm to anxious minds. From classrooms to Twitch streams, from coffee mugs to museum exhibits, Ross's influence transcended television. His image became a symbol of comfort in chaos, his art a timeless reminder that peace could be created, not chased. 3 decades after his death, his legacy is not of loss, but of quiet persistence, proof that the softest voice can echo across time, and that sometimes the calmest man in the room leaves the deepest mark on the world. But who really controls Bob Ross's legacy today? And what secrets lie hidden in the world of his rare paintings? Keep reading to find out. Risks, rewards, and how you verify a real Bob Ross. As Bob Ross's legend continues to grow, so does the desire to own a piece of his legacy. Yet in the art market, where scarcity meets sentiment, collectors must tread carefully. The demand for authentic Ross paintings has created a world where one verified canvas can sell for the price of a luxury car, and one mistake can cost a fortune. For those hoping to find a genuine Ross, the first step is always provenance. The documented history of ownership, a clear chain of custody, is everything. The Towson auction is a perfect example. The 1987 painting Lake with Cabin and Trees didn't just command $47,500 because of its beauty. It carried a handwritten inscription from Ross himself. To Sid and Dorothy, happy painting Bob Ross, and a traceable lineage, from Sidney and Dorothy Knudsen to their daughter Arlene, and later to her son Sam Alassio. That kind of documentation isn't just paperwork, it's proof of authenticity and value. But not every listing online tells such a story. The rise in interest has, unsurprisingly, attracted counterfeits and opportunists. Some sellers attempt to pass off imitations as originals, banking on Ross's recognizable style to deceive inexperienced buyers. A true Ross painting carries certain trademarks, rather than trusting private sellers with vague claims. Condition also plays a major role in value. Paintings that have retained their texture and color, unwarped and unretouched, fetch far more than damaged or restored pieces. Even minor alterations can devalue a work. They tell a painting's entire story. Realistic pricing helps set expectations. Bob Ross Inc. once estimated that authentic works, when they do appear, usually sell in the $8,000 to $10,000 range. But when provenance or public exposure adds weight, as seen in Towson, prices can soar far beyond that, sometimes quadrupling. Still, not every Ross will ever reach the market. Thousands remain sealed in Bob Ross Incorporated's archives, withheld from sale due to legal, licensing, and preservation reasons. For collectors, this reality is both a frustration and a thrill. Each rare appearance of a verified Ross canvas ignites global attention, a reminder that authenticity, like art itself, depends on trust, patience, and the stories painted between the brushstrokes. So what do you think? Does Bob Ross's art, finally getting the recognition it deserves, change how we see him today?